Welcome back to AP World History. We've been talking about Latin America, Central and South America. America has regarded dictatorships preferable to communist governments, and we have made concerted efforts to take down communist governments in Central America and South America, um, and sometimes to the detriment of the people living in those countries. In terms of democratic trends, um, there have been movements in some Latin American countries um, to bring on reform, but for the most part, this has been a slow process. Um, Venezuela, we have had some problems with Venezuela in the recent past. They supply a lot of oil. There are the leader that they have has cooled his relationship to the United States. Brazil has seen elections, new presidents. Um, Peru, the shining path, as they were leftists, they were looking for reform there. It just seems to be a lot of turmoil in these different countries in Latin America. Nicaragua, again, the Sandinistas who came to power through elections, eventually will be removed. In Panama, where we have the Panama Canal, eventually uh, President Carter will turn those back to this canal, the control to Panama. Noriega, who was a dictator there, was peddling drugs to the United States. We invaded Panama and arrested him. Guatemala, again, civil war, death squads, America seeming to be on the side of dictators, and preferable to people who want true reform in their country. Um, you have to understand during this period, we had a Cold War going on with the Soviet Union, and of course, Latin America was caught in the middle of that. Um, in terms of Noriega, he's just right now in American jail, and he had been the president of Panama. Certainly, the history of Latin America, the timeline, have been a lot of intervention by the United States. Starts with Roosevelt's corollary, which says this is Teddy Roosevelt, turn of the 20th century, saying that we will be the policemen of Latin America in Central and South America. We kicked the Spanish out of Cuba in the Spanish-American War, and we will make Cuba a protectorate, and eventually they will exercise their independence. Our policy has always been protect American interests first. The Platt Amendment, this was during the Spanish-American War, simply said that the United States um, uh, had a right to control some of the affairs of Cuba if they made any treaties and so forth, and then the right to intervene if American interests were threatened. Teddy Roosevelt building the Panama Canal. We offered Colombia money to do this. They rejected it. We support a uprising by the Panamanians, and they grant us a zone across their country, and eventually we will give the canal back to them. But the Roosevelt corollary, which just an addendum to the Monroe Doctrine, which said that the United States, this was Latin America, was their hemisphere, other European nations stay out. This shows a picture of the Roosevelt corollary, gunboat diplomacy. We would tell people in Latin America what was good for them. And we certainly have intervened over 100 times in Latin American affairs. This is Teddy Roosevelt telling people that he would speak softly but carry a big stick, and if you weren't going to do what he asked you to do, then he was going to use force against people in Latin America. And this shows a timeline of Americans invading different countries in Latin America. We have invaded Honduras, 1912, the United Fruit Company. We talked about that in Guatemala. When Arbenez is about to redistribute the land, CIA topples his government. Most of the South America, sometimes we hear banana republics, really refers to these countries exporting a lot of fruits and vegetables that they sell to the West. We have invaded Mexico under John Pershing to capture Pancho Villa. This was in 1916, 1917. Dominican Republic, we've numerous times we've occupied that. This map shows the places where we've intervened in Latin America, particularly in the Caribbean and Central America. Not as much in South America, although we've helped topple the government in Chile, which was a Marxist or communist leaning country. It shows us going into Guatemala. But the point of all this is just that we have intervened in Latin American countries numerous times. During Hoover's administration, we tried to practice something called the good neighbor policy, but again, if American interests were threatened, we sent our Marines in there and our Navy to protect our interest. Shows again, Vice President in 1958, Nixon, met strong anti-American sentiment on his goodwill tour in Latin America. 1956, Batista is going to be overthrown and Castro is going to take over. In terms of how we've dealt with Latin America, Taft's administration, in the early 20th century, we practiced something called dollar diplomacy, and that is we would withdraw our investments and our lending money and buying materials from Latin America if they did not go along with what we asked them to do. During Hoover's administration, this is the late 1920s, and into Roosevelt's administration, we practiced again this good neighbor policy, and we have had numerous interventions in Latin America. This was during World War II. We did very little in terms of interfering with Latin American affairs. We were pretty occupied with the Japanese and the Germans. This shows Taft's dollar diplomacy. We would supply the capital, but we'd withdraw it if you didn't go along with what America wanted. And some of these Latin American countries, again, producing things, most of these countries, agricultural goods, coffee, bananas, and so forth, cocoa or chocolate, those things consumed by Western countries. Kennedy in the 1960s brought about the Alliance for Progress, and this was to, we were going to invest in Latin America to help reduce the debt to the U.S. companies. We're not sure what this Alliance for Progress would have meant because Kennedy was assassinated and it was sort of abandoned. And again, we talked about Carter and different presidents promising things to Latin America, and we have supplied aid to them. And again, Carter giving back the Panama Canal during his presidency. This is Kennedy showing a banner here with a Latin American leader. This Alliance for Progress, America helping Latin America improve their standard of living. In terms of women's rights, there have been some movements, and for most part, in the 21st century, every nation has in Latin America has granted the right to vote to women. Still, there are many problems in terms of destroying the environment, overcrowding in cities, slums, poverty, repressive governments. Those things have not gone away. Uh, in terms of employment opportunities, again, women may have the right to vote, but they're not necessarily treated as equals in Latin America. There is a huge problem with migration, uh, illegal migration coming out of Latin America to the United States, particularly. The real problem for right now for the Americans is controlling the border and the number of illegals, mostly coming from Mexico, because the system is not working there. And you can see from these photos on the right here the kinds of living conditions that people experience, and they want a new life. They want a chance for opportunities where they can feed their families, and you can't fault them for that. And the social issues are going to remain until the economies in these countries improve and people have jobs and good paying jobs, and they can afford to break the cycle of poverty. But certainly there are huge numbers of slums and shanty towns that have sprung up all over South America and Central America, close to the cities. Um, uh, Most of the population, again, being poor. And we'll stop right there.